Okay, James, hello. So we are looking at the moment, you are looking at the moment, at pollution, oil spills, and you're going to bring an octopus into this as part of your work. So fantastic. Let me just change my painting water. Doing lots of demonstrations at the moment. First thing I'd like you to ask you to do, if you haven't already, please do go into our Teams files, go into example sketchbooks, whole sketchbooks, and look up Yasmin's sketchbook right at the bottom. She's doing a project very similar to what you're doing, so it'd be fantastic for you to have a look and see the kinds of things to give yourself some ideas that she pursued. So please do look at that if you haven't already. What I'm going to do today is just show you a little bit of painting of an octopus. We'll get some detail in, we'll look at painting with watercolour. We're also going to discuss some further experiments you could do to give you some ideas. So we're working towards this idea of an octopus and oil and things like that. I have just gone online and got myself some resource pictures in case I need to sketch out some more. I should probably get some more paper. An advert I saw online of an octopus in oil. So I do always research. I've also got myself some pictures of oil spills because we want to have a consideration of those colours. Because straight away you'd think black, we definitely can try black, but actually oil is quite iridescent. It has all of these colours in it, so we're going to have a look at that as well. So, first painting or drawing I'm going to do, I've done a quick pencil sketch out of an octopus here. You could do a couple of octopi if you wanted to. I'm just going to start off first painting. I need my paint palette. Some realistic colours to the octopus. Sorry, it's a little bit dark in here. It's not the best lighting, I know. But I'm just going to start off with some realistic colours. And obviously there's a lot of different octopi. You can actually find octopus in a lot of different colours. I'm going to go for a pinky purpley colour to start with. So I'm going to get myself some colours out. Some very reddy pinks just there. I'll go for a bit of a lighter red. Just starting off with some colours. It's very pink. Okay, and the first thing we want to consider is texture. You can see from this photograph here, octopi have so much texture. There's quite a lot of blue in there as well. So as I'm painting, I'm going to start off with kind of little dots of colour and texture. With watercolour, you always want to build up from a lighter colour and then add darker colours in later. So I'm starting off with a bit of a stippling effect. In places, I'm probably going to wash some larger areas. In fact, I'm probably going to start off with more of a wash, but still keeping a little bit textured and designed. Loose colouring. Anywhere that's not white should have some kind of loose wash on there to start with. It's a bit darker down here, but I'll start off with my lighter colours. The lovely thing to do with watercolour is let it bloom. So when it's still wet, dab some slightly thicker colouring in there and let it just blend, let it do its own thing. It will slowly work its way outwards. Especially, you know, if you're going to use watercolour, you want to work with watercolour. Watch watercolour painting videos, they really will help. And then where I've got some darker colours, I might already start on some of these darker tones. Just within these gaps. There's a lot of those little circles on here, which are going to be a bit of a pain in the butt to paint. I'm going to do a really very loose wash down here, all the way over to give myself some base colour. Going in with a slightly orangier red down here and around the eye. So we're just starting with our base colour. And then we'd let that dry. Some more pinks and purpliness on there. Just trying to find anywhere that's got some detail into it. And we're going to have to let that dry before we work on the next layer. I'll pause it for a minute, I'll let it dry, and I'll start showing you our second layer. Okay, so I'm just going into my second layer at the top here now. A couple of little tips for you to try out while you're painting your octopi. If you want to create some surface texture, some dots and some holes, you could try sprinkling on a bit of salt on there, on one of your layers. You do have to wait till it dries for it to come off. Salt, it will suck in some of that colour. It's worth trying out. It will suck in some of the paint texture that you're putting on and it will create a little bit of texture. I'll try and show you actually towards the bottom. So as I said earlier, do have a think about what kind of technique you want on there. If you add little drops of colour on while it's still wet, it will start blooming, it won't be defined. If you want very defined shapes, you have to wait until it dries. So I'm just starting to put on here now some darker textures, as you can see. building up my kind of second layer. Getting in some of those shapes, some of that pattern and detail now. Let's go around the eye. Slightly darker colour. So it's like, I always think break watercolours up into as many layers as you want realistically, but at least kind of 3 layers. At least a kind of lighter wash, then a mid-tone and then a dark tone. That's an absolute minimum. If you want to carry on building extra tones on top of that, you can do. So you can see I'm sticking to a fairly similar colour palette. When I paint, I generally put a colour on my brush and then look around and think if that colour will benefit me anywhere else. Go, ooh, right, where else would that colour go? Maybe back here. That's kind of how I do it, but you don't have to. It's quite dark back there. A bit of blue in that as well. Mix your colours together. Okay, I went pretty dark there, so I'm going to spread that out a little bit. You can always use some tissue and dry it out a bit if you think you've gone a bit too dark in places. Building up my next layers. I need some more blue. Definitely got some bluish areas on here. At the front of him it's quite blue. Just there, and you can see again, just modelling, I'm just dabbing it on to get some of that texture. Actually, the little suckers on here are quite blue, so I'm going to add some blue to that. I missed that. The suckers are all fairly blue, so I think I'll add a bit of blue now going around these suckers. Now, because they've got so many of these little suckers, you want to take your time and give a bit of detail to these. If you kind of just blur them all into one, it's not going to look great. Okay, so you do need to give these a little bit of respect. Sketch them out first. I've left a few out, these tiny ones around here. There was a lot of those. But you do need to give them a little bit of care and attention to get the right shape and design. I'm just filling in kind of some of those little... I'll go in with those darker middle holes in a bit. I'm just heading around the ones that are a bit darker. They're very, very dark blue down here. Again, I haven't waited for that little purple layer to dry, so that's starting to blend into them, but I don't mind that too much at the moment. And then I definitely need a bit more bluey purpliness up here. So, the nature of watercolours, we're keeping it loose, we're keeping it wet and watery. Okay, and I'll let that dry. That's kind of my second layer. I've got some, I could probably get some darker tones into there. This bit that's very, very dark shadowy in there, I think I can go further at this stage with that. Blot in some more colour. I'm going to let that just bloom a little bit because that'll look nice. I think I can go a lot darker around here. Nothing right in the way probably. I need a much more reddy colour in these gaps. So places where I can afford to go in with my kind of darker patches where there's not a lot of detail elsewhere needed, I'm kind of just going in now while I'm waiting for the other layers to dry. Okay, it's very dark in here. That might have been too red there. Do a bit of tissue. Oh well. Taking some of that colour out, moving it elsewhere. Where do I have a bit of tissue? I don't know. Blending that out a bit. Okay, pause it there. Okay, so while we're waiting for that layer to dry, you can see I've drawn a couple of tentacles down here. It's up to you. You could do all of your drawings of different octopi. That would be great if you want to draw a few different octopus on there. I'm just doing tentacles because it'd be a little bit quicker for me, and I probably want to have a little play around with drawing tentacles. There's a couple of options. I think first thing you should do is draw a realistic octopus. Okay, with the normal colours, really lovely detail. Show you can do a little bit more detail in there. Painting would be great for that. Maybe a bit of pen work over the top. The second thing I do, whether with a whole octopus or with a tentacle, is I would explore the idea of painting a fairly realistic coloured tentacle, but in the background, working with all of these oil colours. And choosing these colours are going to be quite difficult. Okay, so the first thing I would do for this is get the area around the back of the tentacle nice and wet. It's up to you if you want to paint the tentacle first and then do this. So I'd get a little bit of a puddle going in some of the main areas. You don't want to put too much on because it'll just dry before you reach it, but I'll start off. Lots of water down here. That way, my inks, and because I'm doing this, this is going to be like the water that has the oil in it, it's going to start blooming. Okay, and I'm just starting off with some reds and some blacks, which are the kind of obvious colours for oil. But when I was looking at my picture before, I could see there were all these iridescent colours, so actually I'm going to try and get some of these colours in. Maybe a little bit of this greeny kind of yellow. They usually work in a little bit of a rainbow. So I'm going to try and get some of those colours in around the black. So I'm going to go from yellow to a kind of orangey colour. And because it's already very wet, I'm just letting it all blend in and do its own thing. A pinky kind of colour. And then a really bright blue again. And they're probably, because it's wet, they're all going to muddy each other. And actually that's kind of what I want it to do. I'm going to mix some black into the spaces there, a bit more blue. Now I want that to get muddy and oily and dark. Quite like that yellowy greeny colour. It looks very toxic, doesn't it? And some of that red, I think that works quite well. So I'm trying to create the impression here of an oil spill. I'm going to go back around here again with some of the black, some of the blue. The idea is it's going to be such a contrast to the beautiful tentacle that you paint here. So this is why, if you're going to paint the tentacle first and then do this, obviously let it dry completely before you go this way. Some very dark blue in there. I'm going to go into that purple again. And it's just deciding which colours work best. It might be in different sections you use different colours. I'm quite liking that reddy purpley colour. I did really like that yellowy green though. We're just making it look very toxic. I think as soon as you start mixing some colours, let them muddy up, it does look very toxic. And that is ultimately what we want. Toxicity. Okay, so that's something you can explore. And again, you can play around different ways of doing that. Add some more puddles of water to it, let it spread, let it blend. Use some tissue if you think you've gone a bit overboard. But I think that will work quite well. I think it's a lovely experiment to start looking at oil in the sea as if the tentacle was like stretching out and trying to survive against the oil. The other thing you could do, again with an entire octopus or just a tentacle, is start working on the idea of using these colours to create the tentacle itself. So rather than doing the sea behind it, I start using those same deep colours with the tentacle. So I start using some of that black, some of that blue. So in contrast to these beautiful kind of light purples and pinks, my tentacle starts looking quite toxic and dark. I'm going to keep all of the detail that I wanted to have from before. My blacks, bits of blues in there and purples. It's not the same realistic colours we had before. Some of that very toxic greeny yellow. Go straight back into the black. I'm finding the brighter colours don't work as well. Little hints of them I think work quite well. Go straight back in with the black, muddy it all up. I'm just getting some water to spread out some of that black because that might be too heavy. Trying once again to go. Always have a bit of tissue on hand. But yes, ultimately I think that's working rather well. Get some of that purple in there. Just trying to go in between the gaps of the suckers. You'll see in a little bit when we draw a bit more detail into that, how it ends up coming out. What colour do I want next? Go from the black into the green. You don't have to keep with the same order. It's not a rainbow. You know, you can go with some yellow, some blues. It is a bit of colour theory of what's going to work well together. Maybe some bright reds. I haven't used any red yet. Not really. Do I like the red as much? Not really. But this is where everything you do, you're testing out on how it works. How effective it is. You could even try painting where it goes from oil to clean. So how it fades out. So it could get nice and realistic at the end. So we've got 3 small experiments here we could try on your own, which is the outside, the background being covered in oil. Obviously these could be on their own pages, these can be separate, you can cut them out, stick them in. You can have one where you're doing the octopus or the actual tentacles as if they're looking like they're oil, and you could have a realistic drawing of an octopus. Other options, if you were to paint your realistic octopus and then cut it out, you could then paint a really big washed background just like this and cut your octopus out and stick it on top. This is where we're exploring what's going to work best. Okay, you need to try lots of ways out. It's not just going to be the first thing you do. Try painting some backgrounds, cut them out, stick them on top of each other. If we were to paint blocks of different colours for the oil spills and cut them as if they're in waves, I think I'll try and show you a little example of that in a bit. This is still not dry. Still not dry. But you can see, got a few on the go. Highly recommend, do all of these at once. Get yourself a few pieces of paper, sketch yourself out some designs, and then do all of it at once. Because like I said, all of these layers, you're going to have to wait for them to dry before you can kind of move forward. Still a bit wet, so it's still blooming as I'm painting. I'm okay with that at the moment, but I'm going to want it definitely dry for my last layer to get some of my detail. A little bit drier down there. Okay, I should stop there because it's not very interesting for you to watch. So when this is dry, I'll finish it off and I'll send you a picture. Right, so I'll send you a list of ideas for experimentation. Painting a couple of octopi nice and realistically. Once this is done being painted, I'll show you. I'm probably going to go for it in some black pen as well. Give it a little bit of definition or detail, or coloured pen would work as well. Biros would work, blue biro would work very well if we're going to stick with the blue rather than black. And then I'd love you to try some experiments like this. So big washes of colour on plain paper, rip them up, stick them down, draw tentacles, draw octopi, start cutting them out, start sticking them on top. Okay, explore, explore, explore. Okay, just as a little tip, I'm actually going to colour this one in coloured pencil. It's good to show that you can use a few different coloured pencil techniques. I've started off with a kind of skin tone colour. I'm gone all the way over just to give me a base to blend in, and now I'm going to build up my darker colours on top. So I'm going in with quite a lot of reds and purples in this. Okay, you'll slowly see the colours as they build up.